Welcome to this section on security and encryption. These are not necessarily the most fun sections to deal with, but they are super important for the exam. The exam will definitely ask you a lot of security questions as well as encryption. And so KMS, the encryption SDK, the parameter store, IAM, all these things are a central piece of the exam. And I want to make this as easy as possible because security, I know you're not an expert or maybe not an expert, but it's tough to understand sometimes, but I try to make it as simple as I can with some diagrams, and hopefully by the end of this section you'll have a good grasp of how security works and which security to use in which circumstances, and then you will rock all your questions. So first, an overview of encryption mechanism. And the first one is going to be encryption in flight. Then why would we want even encryption in flight? Well, we want encryption in flight because if I send a very sensitive secret, for example, my credit card, to a server to make a payment online, I want to make sure that no one else on the way where my network packet is going to travel can see my credit card number. And so I want to make sure that when I make a payment online, I have that green lock, I have that HTTPS website, which guarantees me that it is an SSL enabled website and I will get encryption in flight. And so when you have encryption in flight, the data will be encrypted before I send it, and then the server will be decrypting it after receiving it. But only myself and the server know how to do these things. Now, the SSL certificates are what's going to help with the encryption. And so another way to see it is HTTPS. So anytime we've been dealing with an Amazon service and it had an HTTPS endpoint, that guaranteed us that there was encryption in flight. And now the whole web, almost the whole web, needs to run on SSL and HTTPS. Basically, when you have this enabled, you're protected against the man-in-the-middle attack. And so this guarantees that, when you have that green lock and that the service certificate is valid, that no one can retrieve your sensitive information. So let's do a quick example. Here is us, and we want to talk to an HTTPS website on AWS, could be DynamoDB, could be whatever we want. And then what we're going to do is that we're going to have our super secret data. We're going to encrypt it with SSL encryption and send this over the network, and then the website will receive the data and know how to decrypt it. Okay, very, very simple, the idea of it, but the execution is not as easy, so this is how much I'll give you. The good news is that all programming languages know how to do SSL encryption and decryption, and all the libraries do this for you, so you don't have to worry about anything. This is not something you have to deal with directly. The second thing is going to be called server-side encryption at rest. And so that is when the data is encrypted after being received by the server. So before that, the server was receiving data, decrypting it, and using it in its decrypted form. Here, the server is going to store the data on its disk. And so we need to know that the server is storing the data in an encrypted form. Because in case the server gets hijacked by someone else, we don't want that someone else to be able to decrypt that data. And so the data will be decrypted before being sent back to our client. So thanks to a key, usually called a data key, then that data is going to be stored in an encrypted form. And the encryption and decryption keys must be managed somewhere, usually called a KMS or key management service. And the server must have the right to talk to that key management service. So here's our object, and we're going to transfer it, for example, to EBS. So it's going to be transferred over whatever mechanism, and EBS will use a data key. And using the data key, it will perform encryption of that data. And now it's stored in an encrypted form. And then the day we need to retrieve the data for whatever reason, then EBS, the AWS service, will do decryption for us using the data key again, and we'll get the encrypted data and back to us over HTTP or HTTPS, for example. So this is how server-side encryption works. And as you can see, the server side itself, or the service, manages the encryption and the decryption and uses a data key it has access to. So this is for server-side encryption at rest. And we've seen that many AWS services do use that encryption at rest. Now let's talk about client-side encryption. And in client-side encryption, the data will be encrypted by the client, and the client is us. And the server will never be able to decrypt that data. The data will then be decrypted by a receiving client. So all in all, the data is just stored on the server, but the server doesn't know what the data means. And the server, as best practice, should never be able to decrypt the data anyway. And for this, we could leverage something called envelope encryption, but I have a whole lecture on this later on because this is pretty advanced, but the exam will ask you about envelope encryption. So for now, let's just do an abstraction of it. And so we have our object, and on our client, we're going to use a data key. and we're going to encrypt our data client side. Okay, so we perform encryption with that data key. Now we send that data to any store of data we want. Could be FTP, could be S3, could be whatever you want really. You put your data wherever you want in Amazon or somewhere else. And then when you receive it, your client will receive an encrypted object. And if it has access to the data key, if it can manage to retrieve the data key from somewhere, then it will be able to perform a decryption and get the decrypted object as a result. So as you can see now, the encryption happens client side, okay? The server, the data store, does not know how to decrypt or encrypt the data. It just receives encrypted data. And so that's quite secure as well. So these are the three kinds of encryption you can get overall, except envelope encryption that I will show you later on. So this is not using any KMS just yet. This is just an abstraction of how encryption works. I know this may be a little bit simplified, but hopefully that clears up what encryption is. And in the next lecture, we're going to do a deep dive into KMS.